Hello, I'm Ronnie Eldridge. Welcome to Eldridge and Company. Wayne Barrett, author and Village Voice columnist and the world's leading expert on Giulianiism, is back to talk some more about Rudy. Thank you, Wayne.
Hi, Ronnie.
We talked last week about Grand Illusion, this book that's coming out in paperback in a couple of weeks, that really documents Rudy's experience and actions with terrorism, right?
Right.
And what's the bottom line? Very quickly, because we have a lot
The
of
bottom
other
line
things
is
to
that he had no idea what the threat was. He ignored the '93 bombing. He did nothing to prepare the city. We detail in many different ways, from the command center to the 911 phone operation to the radios, all the ways in which the city behaved between the '93 bombing and 9/11 as if there were no terrorist threat. We talk about how he never even increased the number of detectives assigned to the Joint Terrorism Task Force, the same number when he took office, the same number on 9/11. He basically had no idea that the city had a threat other than street thugs. And no one would fault him for focusing on street thugs, but there were two threats.
And the command center was ridiculously situated. There was no backup to the command center, as he now claims there was, right? There was nothing done about the faulty radios that the fire department used. The protocols for the Office of Emergency Management were not followed.
They were not even
implemented.
At the police department. Howard Safer, Rudy's favorite police commissioner before Bernie Carrick, refused to sign off on and implement these unified command and control procedures and protocols that Jerry Howard, the very able emergency management director, came up with, and so they never went into effect. So we really had no operable unified command system on 9/11 through Rudy's negligence and unwillingness to support Jerry Howard. There were these many sessions with Rudy there and the top law enforcement people, the fire commissioner, police commissioner, Jerry Howard, trying to get agreement on the protocols. And not only would Howard Safer not implement them, he was so opposed to them, he had Jerry Howard tailed by police officers. Here you have a surveillance team trailing the emergency man because they thought he was too close to the firefighters, and they followed him out to a facility in Brooklyn where he was talking to fire chiefs, and they shot photographs of him as if it was illicit for him to be talking to fire chiefs because they were in a war with the fire department to see who could control the protocols. So they never really had almost every city in America has unified command control procedures.
Do we have them now?
We do have them now. We do have them.
So this is just all, as you said, a grand illusion. And Giuliani has rewritten history as he recites it, and as all these guys recite it, it changes, right?
Well, it's not only that Giuliani has rewritten history. I mean, it's not even just that the media has rewritten history. The American public believes because of what they saw with their own eyes. They feel they can trust their own eyes, and they did see him behave in what appeared to be a valiant and effective way that day and the days that immediately followed. Those memories are seared into the American electorate, and I think they're having a profound effect on this election. But the memories themselves are deceptive, because why was he there? The reason he's the hero of 9/11 is he was there.
And he shouldn't have been there.
But he shouldn't have been there.
And nor should the police commissioner, nor the fire commissioner.
Right.
They should have been working,
They should have been at the bunker, and the bunker shouldn't have been there. The only reason he's the hero of 9/11 is because he was there.
On
and
television.
he was there because he was silly enough to put the command center, a $70 million facility, in the same complex that had already been attacked. If the command center had been in Brooklyn, where Mayor Bloomberg has put it, and where Jerry Howard and others in his administration urged him to put it, he would have been much more effective that day, but much less of the colorful character that he appeared to be,
and that he is
covered
now
in soot.
And since then, though, we have the 9/11 Commission, we have a detailed report by McKinsey, and we have the National Institute of Standards and Technology, all who have come out with real severe critiques of what happened on 9/11.
Yeah, they're very severe critiques, but they're framed in... Yeah, they're framed in language. I mean, the NIST study, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, which was basically funded by a grant from that Hillary Clinton obtained, the $16 million. They had more to spend than the 9/11 Commission. They have released a 10,000-page report. I may be the only person who ever read it, and it's extremely critical of many of the things that the city did. But it's leaden language. It never uses Giuliani's name. It talks in terms of all kinds of malfunctions leading up to and on that day, but it does it in language that newspapers can't seize, that never would translate into a soundbite. And so these very critical analysis of the failings of the administration have gone largely ignored by the media. Now the media has other reasons to ignore it. They created the myth. Right. You know, they're very reluctant
and now it's spreading. I mean, I was fascinated with Hillary Clinton saying, you know, I've lived with 9/11, being the senator from New York, giving her an elevated position over other people who are more knowledgeable about terrorism or the results of it. It's just, it's pervaded everything. Now, Giuliani, but the commission report criticized it, but that wasn't really the focus of their major attention.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing that happened, well, the other thing that happened is the 9/11 commission report comes out. All the media is understandably much more focused on what it says about Bush and Condi Rice and Al-Qaeda. There's one chapter in there, a very persuasive chapter, Chapter 9, that deals with the city's response, but it got lost in the shuffle. Yeah. It should be re-examined by the national media now that he is the leading presidential candidate of the Republican Party. They should just pick up the book and read the chapter. If they don't want to pay attention to this book, they could pay attention to the official governmental reports.
Send them all out. Now, Giuliani has formed Giuliani Partners, and he's now worth how much money?
Well, you know, it's hard to say, but it's somewhere. If you read the Washington Post, the New York Times, and if you actually read the financial disclosure that these stories are based on, that he was forced to file as a presidential candidate, the range is all the way up to $66 million. But others said it might be in the 40s. It's very difficult to figure out what all these assets.
But it's many millions of dollars, which he did not have before 9/11.
Yes.
And he gets $100,000 or more to go and make a speech.
He's made as much as $300,000 to repeat the same anecdotal account that he's delivered now hundreds of times of every step-by-step that he took that morning.
Which is all recreated.
Yeah, that's, you know, and he doesn't happen to mention in this step-by-step recreation that he completely failed to follow any basic, even though they never approved unified command protocols. The basic understanding of unified command of any command structure is you got to get all the commanders in the same location. And he's the one himself who took all the police officers, all the top police brass, with him to Barclay Street and away from.
Carrick Carrick, the police commissioner of the city of New York, said his prime responsibility was to guard the mayor.
That's right.
He became a bodyguard, which he was before.
That's how he started out.
That's how he
finished
ended.
up. Yeah.
So Giuliani Partners makes a lot of money because it's based on its accomplishments as being the guru of management. I mean, he extols himself and his management techniques in the city of New York, right?
It's a loss. Yes, it's a loss.
So what did he do? He left a budget gap of $4 billion when he left. And we're now in a little tussle between Bloomberg and the Giuliani administration as to the fact that he really didn't leave a mess, but we know he did. He left $4 billion budget
Let's
gap.
talk about the fiscal record. The fiscal record is just, I mean, look, he had years of enormous surplus, the biggest surpluses in the history of the city. He didn't cause the surpluses. This was the booming Clinton economy. I don't know if Clinton deserves credit, but certainly
it happened.
Yes, certainly it happened. So he had these gigantic surpluses. Contrast the way in which Mike Bloomberg has dealt with the surpluses that he is now living through with the way Rudy did. He used much of the surpluses to reduce the city's debt. Giuliani used zero of the city surpluses to reduce the debt. Not only did he not reduce the debt, he found new ways to spend money. And he found new ways to spend money, and at the same time he went to the unions and he got them to agree to postpone payments that the city makes to the pension fund when he had these enormous surpluses. So when Bloomberg came in, he had to make up for the payments to the pension fund that Giuliani in years of surplus refused to make.
And he didn't invest in an infrastructure or anything like that, nothing.
Well, we certainly had some capital budget improvements. I wouldn't say we had none, but I certainly think that when you look at, obviously he reduced taxes. Now he's going around the country. You would be astonished. He's now saying that he reduced taxes in the city by $9 billion.
I know. He always
voted on these budget, Ronnie. I mean, these are ridiculous. You know what he's claiming as a part of the reduction? Well, on the commuter tax, which he opposed the abolition of the commuter tax.
Right.
Well, he was counting that as a tax cut that he did. He opposed the state legislature's decision
He just
to
always
cut the
cites
commuter
these
tax.
statistics that I just assume are all made up. I mean,
well-
maybe they have some touch to reality, but they are always at the top. I mean, they're fudged somehow different.
Fudging is when you might be 100 million off.
Right.
But billions and billions
You
off?
can't be.
Yeah.
So what did he do? The school system, he certainly didn't improve. As a matter of fact, he said he started out to blow it up. Didn't he say that?
Yes, he did say
Yeah.
he wanted to blow up
Right. He
110
wanted
Livingston Street.
vouchers, right?
Yeah.
And he had a terrible time with the different superintendents that were appointed
Well,
by
I
the
mean,
board. I
he
mean,
had
he
no
just-
school plan.
He did nothing.
I mean, look at what he did with the New York City school system. Look, contrast it again with Mike Bloomberg. There are pluses and minuses of the Bloomberg plan, but they have genuinely tried to reform the school system. No such effort even was considered. I remember debating Fran Ryder on television once.
She was the deputy mayor.
Deputy mayor in the middle of the administration, and they were actually urging the state legislature to cut school assistance to the city of New York because they said the system is so rotten, we don't want more money for it. And that's what they said. I mean,
Housing. Let's talk about housing.
well,
What did he do in housing?
if you compare the units that were produced in the Koch administration, which of course started the major city subsidies for housing, if you compare the units that were produced under Koch, under Dinkins, and under Giuliani, and under Bloomberg, guess who comes in last? You know, Rudy comes in last in terms, did he produce new units of housing? Yes, but it was the smallest number of units annually produced when you compare the 4 mayors that have used city funding to produce housing.
Welfare.
Well, you know, and this is one of the things that he goes around the country saying, and there certainly is very substantial truth to the fact that he greatly reduced
he
the
knocked
welfare
them all off.
rolls. Yeah, we have no idea. You know, the thing is that we have no idea. The Giuliani administration, as much as they want to lay claim to the reduction of welfare, deliberately never tracked what happened to the people
Absolutely.
who were
I
knocked
remember
off the
that.
rolls. There was one study done of about 70 individuals. That was the only study that was ever done. They have no idea what happened to these people, and there was this mythical belief within the Giuliani insiders that there was this vast underground economy that could absorb all of the people that were knocked off welfare. That was what they were really thinking, because they knew that they had no stats to indicate that any of these people moved into jobs, permanent or temporary. We know that they swept the streets as
What
workfare
happened to
workers.
Jason Turner, who was this unbelievable commissioner at HRA?
You know, I don't know what he's doing
yeah.
today. I don't have any idea.
And what was the mantra he used about jobs?
Well, the same mantra that Rudy always cites about, I learned it from my father, the job is the best way to train yourself, because they also didn't believe in any form of
But
training.
didn't he also give us the slogan that was over the gates in Auschwitz?
Oh, I don't know whether Jason Turner ever said
I
that.
thought you said that.
I can't
I
remember that.
I think it's in Rudy.
You remember it better than me.
I must say that what we're talking about now is all covered in your book that came out before Grand Illusion, which is called Rudy. And it starts at his early life and goes right through. So we've done HRA. I mean, there was such a cut in the number of people applying for food stamps because they ruled them all ineligible, right?
Right.
For homeless people, that was a scandal.
This is really the most unconscionable thing, because the city doesn't spend $1 on food stamps. You're just denying to the local economy all this federal money. You don't have to reimburse a cent. And
not only does it help people who don't have enough money to buy the food, but it helps the people who are selling the food.
Right. It's a real jolt to the local economy, and so it was just
They made
punitive.
it impossible for people to.
Just punitive behavior, just absolutely cynically punitive behavior, totally anti-poor behavior.
And then he went into the Agency for the Homeless. It first started with grand plans, and then changed them all, right?
Yes, and you know, if you remember back to the old
Suits.
Rudy, the Rudy that campaigned in '89 in particular, he was a tremendous champion of the homeless. You know, he used to walk the streets with Gabe Pressman. You know, when Gabe was doing all the great pieces on Channel 4 about the homeless, and he was deeply concerned about the homeless. He abandoned all of that. I mean, basically his homeless policy was get them out of sight. Get them out of sight. I mean, he had no real policy to try to get people. I mean, the number of permanent units that were created for homeless people was minuscule. He had no real policy for taking care of homelessness.
I mean, do you happen to know the number of lawsuits that were brought that people brought against the city that he lost? I mean, I don't remember the number, but it's a very high percentage.
Are you talking about civil liberties lawsuits?
All the lawsuits.
Well,
there was civil liberties lawsuits.
I mean, I know that the Civil Liberties Union brought something like 19 lawsuits about civil liberties, and he lost every one of them.
Yeah. I mean, he really was. The one thing he did for security was to put all the security at City Hall.
Well, yeah.
As if that was going to be the center for the next terrorist attack.
What he wound up citing retroactively was, geez, I knew that we had a terrorist threat because I fortified my own office and the Gracie Mansion where I once lived before my wife put me out.
So if we have to grade him as far as his managerial abilities and techniques, it wouldn't be a very high grade.
It wouldn't be a very high grade. Now, I do think, we haven't talked about the police, I do think you have to give him some credit on the crime rate. I mean, first of all, the most important managerial decision he made was to hire Bill Bratton, who I think is the outstanding police commissioner that this city has had. I think he's an outstanding police commissioner in Los Angeles, and Rudy deserves credit for selecting him. He also deserves blame for firing him because the guy was getting more credit than he was. And so,
which is a trait that he's displayed all along his life.
Yeah, but Bill Bratton did implement managerial strategies, which Rudy now takes credit for. In fact, you mentioned Giuliani Partners. The fact is that Rudy planned even before 9/11 on creating a consulting company, and he was going to go out and essentially market Bill Bratton's ideas. He was going to try to sell Comstat, which was totally a Jack Maples and Bill Bratton concept. Maples was a deputy to Bratton. He was going to go out and market this as his own. He was going to market welfare reduction as his own. That's what he planned on doing before 9/11. And but you have to say that there were some managerial techniques introduced in the police department that did have salutary effects and that are still being followed by the Bloomberg administration.
But he also claims, I think, an undue proportion of credit for reducing crime when crime reduced all over the country, didn't I mean,
yes, I mean, the difference is at the margins between us and other major
Some
cities.
of the systems that made
we
sense,
did have a larger reduction, a larger percentage reduction in crime than most major cities. There were a couple that topped us. I think Seattle topped us on the homicide rate, but we were ahead of the pack, and so he deserves at least some of the credit for the margin of difference. The margin of difference, though, is what we've now established is that in all the years after Bloomberg, after Giuliani under the Bloomberg administration, is they showed us that you could also be ahead of the pack and not polarize the city. More than half of the black community voted for Bloomberg in the last mayoral election against a minority candidate, and yet the crime rate went down. And what Rudy convinced us of as a city is that polarization, racial polarization, police brutality, and all the rest of it were things that that were the bad side of what you had to take in order to get a reduction in crime. And the Bloomberg administration's record has totally rebutted that.
We've had the biggest reduction.
And he had to reduce it from an already low rate. So it's much harder to drive a rate that's low further down.
Well, you have a favorite thing that you say, aside from 9/11, Giuliani and the American public is known for what?
Oh, the squeegees.
The squeegees,
right.
So tell us about squeegees.
Well, that was
very quick because we have so much else.
The squeegees were another claim to fame, which almost every American understands that he got rid of the squeegees. But it's like, the fact is that Bill Bratton says in my book that when he took office as commissioner, which is the same day Rudy took office as mayor, there wasn't a squeegee left on the street. That Ray Kelly, under the Dinkins administration, got all the squeegees off the street because Giuliani had started making an issue of it in '92.
In the campaign.
So they got rid of them all, and they were all gone. In fact,
and there weren't that many to begin with.
Right. I quote the deputy police commissioner who was in charge of getting rid of squeegees. He worked in the Dinkins administration. He's a great admirer of Giuliani's. He stayed on in the Giuliani administration for 2 years. He's at some public appearance where Rudy is laying claim to the squeegees. And he walks up to Christine Latigano and he says, "You people are the greatest ever. You're doing such a great job. Why do you have to take credit for something you had nothing to do with?"
So he did.
Yeah.
All right. So then we have this pattern of not great management, Giuliani Partners, and he takes with him a lot of people from his administration and his friends, Giuliani Partners, right?
Yes.
And some of them who are not known as being the most brilliant or capable.
Yes, he
Most
takes.
of them.
Yeah, he takes Richie Shire.
Right.
You know, one of the things
Richie Shire was
is the head of OEM after Jerry Hauer, and that's the kind of commentary on what happens.
But that's right. He was there at 9/11,
Yes.
but he was also somebody not really capable of running
Right,
OEM
he
to
was
begin
a dispatcher and a
Yeah.
political loyalist. We talked about him
Yeah,
last
yeah.
week. So he brings, and Hauer is a nationally recognized emergency responder.
Yeah.
He doesn't want a guy like Jerry Hauer around. And by the time he leaves office, and when he's shaping Giuliani partners, he doesn't even bring a single deputy mayor. And he had competent deputy mayors. He brings the crew of loyalists around him. I mean, 2 Giuliani partners. So he's got Tom Von Essen, he's got Richard Shire, he brought Bernie Kerik, now departed. You know, the crew that was standing, you know, these were the silent men who stood by him while he made all the press conferences after 9/11.
And then he brought Carbonetti, who you interestingly trace in this book. The Carbonettis, the relationship of Carbonettis to the Giulianis go way back to parents' levels.
Well, the grandparents.
Grandparents.
Yeah, yes. You know, Harold Giuliani, Rudy's father, was extremely close to Tony Carbonetti's grandfather. I mean, they're closest friends. And Tony Carbonetti and, you know, Harold would take Rudy up to the East Harlem where Mr. Carbonetti lived, and they'd go to the Yankee game together. And then Lou Carbonetti would, the son of the grand, I can't remember. I think they're both Lou's, yes, but the father of Tony Carbonetti would go to the games with young Rudy. And so Tony Carbonetti, who is now, I mean, probably Rudy's principal political operative at Giuliani Partners and in the campaign, Tony Carbonetti is 3 generations of relationships. Those are the kinds of relationships Rudy trusts. Tony Carbonetti was the inside player, the guy who cut the deals at City Hall. He was the chief of staff.
And there were a lot of deals.
There were a lot of deals.
This is a man who ran on character, right?
Yeah.
And
when you look
corruption
when you look at the Giuliani archive, you know, which of course has been filtered now, Giuliani seized all of his own papers. No mayor's ever done this, brought them to a warehouse in Queens, shredded some, and then returned some to the city archives. And so you could look at Rudy Washington, the only black deputy mayor in the Giuliani administration, and every paper that Rudy Washington ever was involved with is still available in the archive. Tony Carbonetti had 36 pages that wind up in the archive.
Outrageous.
Everything
Now,
gets destroyed.
Did anybody go to court about that?
The city council kind of waved their arms, said they were going to do something serious. They wound up passing a bill that was prospective rather than retroactive. Initially, they said they were going to pass a bill that required the documents to be returned immediately, but they didn't. All the archivists in the city, I went down to the hearings, were just alarmed and just very upset about what happened with the Giuliani records. But now we have the Giuliani filtered history in the archive.
They've totally rewritten it.
Yeah.
Giuliani always talks about his father as being his inspiration for hard work and things, and yet Harold Giuliani didn't do much hard work.
He barely worked a day in his life. I mean, unless you call beating somebody up with a baseball bat
work. He worked with some people who were of ill repute, right?
I mean, he had a job in the bar, yes. But as I said in the book, you know, he wouldn't even sweep the floors. It was Helen Giuliani, Rudy's mother's. It was her brother that owned the bar, and Harold was above. He had Eddie, who actually owned the bar, had to sweep it up and work there till late at night. Harold was he was the enforcer. You know, this was a loan shark operation, it was a gambling operation, and he was the enforcer, but he didn't do a whole lot of work.
So Giuliani also worked in the Justice Department, and he was the Attorney General in charge of the Southern District here. He had to fill out a lot of papers, right? And it asks about your relationship, doesn't it, criminal justice and stuff. And his father served a prison term. Did that ever appear on any of those papers?
I think it's a serious problem for Rudy, and it has surprised me that no one has ever really examined this, because what I found in the first Giuliani book was this entire criminal history, not just of Rudy's father, but of Rudy's uncle. Who owned the bar, not Eddie, who owned it in the later phase, but Uncle Louis, who was a made member of a crime family.
Yeah.
And his son Louis, who was the same age as Rudy, and they grew up together, was killed by the FBI. How many people does the FBI shoot down in the street in Brooklyn? Happens very rarely. So the family was was definitely very connected to the mob. And yet, when Rudy gets his first big job in the Justice Department down in Washington, he not only has to fill out papers, he's questioned extensively. It's a very, very significant background check. He had the 6th highest position in the Justice Department at a very early age. At that time, he'd never made a mob case. We now know he's the great mob prosecutor. Yeah. At that time, he'd never made a mob case in his life. His uncle, his father, and his cousin were all still out there. And he never indicated. I have not seen the FBI background thing, but I did interview Harold Tyler, who was the Deputy Attorney General of the United States, 2nd highest position. He's the one who hired Rudy. He read the background investigation. He told me none of this was in the background investigation. So Rudy had to have misled the FBI. He later said when the book came out that he knew some of this when I made all the revelations about the family. But some of it he didn't know. Well, whatever part of it he knew, he didn't tell the FBI.
And he had to know. I mean, that can't be. He has managed to rewrite his entire life.
He has. He
really has. It's a quite amazing thing. So it means at least he's very cunning and smart that way.
Oh, there's no question about it. He's very self-servingly smart. There's no, and, well, I wouldn't question, his intelligence. I knew him very well as a federal prosecutor. I watched him try cases. I think he's an extremely capable man. No question about it.
Well, we have come to the end, and we haven't even talked about any of the clients of Giuliani and Partners, so I guess we're going to have to do that in the future. So if he remains the front runner in this presidential election, we will be back. But in the meantime, I do hope that more people read these books because they're fascinating.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wayne Barrett. If there are any people you'd like to hear and topics you'd like us to explore, please let me know. You can write to me at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016, or you can go to the website at cuny.tv and click on Contact Us. I look forward to hearing from you.